Hey class, in this recording we're going to dive in and start talking about the respiratory system. So let's get to it. As we look at our respiratory system, it's important to note that when we say respiration, we're referring to breathing in and breathing out. So respiration is a form of ventilation, the movement of air, aka breathing. And in other contexts, when we talked about respiration, think of cellular respiration. That's referring to the making of ATP when we had our discussion of cellular metabolism last chapter. So within the it's kind of frustrating that within anatomy and physiology, the context of anatomy and physiology, the same word can have different meanings depending on which body system you're talking about. As we look at respiration, breathing in, the respiratory system, breathing in and breathing out, that has some broad functions that include gas exchange. When we talk about gas exchange, we mean that we're going to flip-flop oxygen gas and carbon dioxide gas. We exchange them between the air and the blood. We add oxygen to the blood and remove carbon dioxide from the blood. We use our respiratory system for communication. We have speech and vocalization. Some of them are nonverbal, where you go, you grunt at people. Or you could talk to people, but you need to have the movement of air in order to make those vocalizations. Olfaction is a function of the respiratory system in the fact that we use our respiratory system to move air and the olfactory molecules past our nasal or through our nasal cavity and past our olfactory membrane. And then also we use the respiratory system for acid-base balance. And this is the part of the respiratory system that most students understandably get a little confused on because the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bloodstream is also going to influence the pH of our blood. Something else we use our respiratory system for is to regulate blood pressure. We use our respiratory system to synthesize a hormone called angiotensin II. And the more angiotensin II we have, the more we can help to regulate urinary output. As we look at blood and lymph flow, our respiratory system helps us to move blood, particularly venous blood and lymphatic fluids, because when we inhale, we are going to have low pressure in our thorax, our thoracic cavity, and higher pressure in our abdominal pelvic cavity, and that's going to cause that fluid to move up towards the heart to flow. We use our respiratory system for filtration. In particular, we do a lot of filtration with our lungs. Our lungs are constantly filtering out small blood clots. It's also one of the reasons why when somebody has an embolism, it's typically a pulmonary embolism because of just the circulatory nature of our respiratory system. Of our circulatory system. And then as we look at our expansion of abdominal contents, we can use our respiratory system to help push things out of our abdominal pelvic cavity. It's called the Valsalva maneuver. It's when you take a big breath and you bear down. And this Valsalva maneuver is used a lot of times by people that are defecating or urinating, and it's also used during the childbirthing process as well. Now, as we look at the organs of our respiratory system, the main organs include the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. And this pharynx is the back of our throat. We haven't talked about the pharynx in a lot of detail yet. And as we look at this air, one moment, please. As we look at the air that's going into our respiratory system, as it's going in, it'll ultimately stop at the alveoli in the back of our lungs. And these alveoli are very thin-walled little air sacs, and we have millions of these little guys. They're all over our lungs. And the purpose of these, think of structure determining function. Because they have such a thin wall, they function very well to exchange gases with our bloodstream. And then after having that gas exchange, we constrict or contract our alveoli a little bit, and then the air rushes back out again. As we look at the conducting zone of our respiratory system, the conducting zone is a phrase that refers to passageways that are going to only have airflow. There's no gas exchange. And the conducting zone starts at the very beginning of our respiratory system. So the nostrils on our nose, sometimes referred to as external nares, and all the way to the major bronchioles within the lungs. So to recap, the major organs include the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, and the bronchi, followed up with the lungs, the left-right lungs. So those are our major organs, and we'll talk about each of these major organs in more detail. As we look at the respiratory zone of our respiratory system, this is the part where we have gas exchange. So the respiratory zone is the gas exchange region. And this is typically going to be at the alveoli and to a lesser degree the alveolar duct. And as we look at our respiratory tract, we can also break it up into upper and lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract is all the nose through the larynx. And then the lower respiratory tract is the trachea all the way to the alveoli of the lungs. Or another way to look at it is organs of the head and neck are on the top or superior, those are the upper respiratory tract, and then organs of the thorax or thoracic cavity are in the lower respiratory tract. And that's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them on the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.